So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, everyone who's logging in and joining us this afternoon. And as we go through the webinar today, certainly everyone's on mute, but there are live chat features, and we'd be glad to go over some Q&A also during the webinar. Today, I'm excited. So as a franchise lawyer, one of the things that I do not find interesting about franchising is when it comes to insurance and insurance protection, but it's probably one of the most important things that franchisors need to be aware about, franchise attorneys, and an entire development team. Today's webinar, Winning Insurance Strategies for Emerging Franchisors. And so I'm really glad to be doing this, especially with my good friend, Mike Porpora. And we're going to be discussing with Mike a number of things I think are overlooked in the franchise world and get some expert guidance. So many of you may know Mike. Certainly Mike is well known in the insurance and the franchise industry. Not only a good friend, Mike's a specialist in the insurance world. And I consult with Mike frequently when we're developing new franchise programs, when we're discussing insurance protection for our existing brands. And so thanks for joining us today, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Charles. I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, and so it's been a good number of years now. You've been heavily involved in the franchise world, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I owe it to you and to Brian for exposing me to what franchising was. I've always done business with franchise unit owners over the course of a 33-year career. But getting involved on the franchisor and the emerging brand side of it has been really interesting. I love the space. It's one of the most enjoyable things that I've been doing over the last couple of years. Very exciting. Just such a positive area to do business in.
Yeah, and so I appreciate it. It's kind of pathetic for both of us, but I think we spent a Saturday or one day, you came by the office and helped me out. We went through some of our clients' insurance provisions, and I thought it was really helpful. And so this brought about this.
I think for both of us, I think that, I remember that, and then we had lunch over at Toast, I think. But that's the whole point of collaborating with professionals. When two professionals like you and I, we work together and we're helping another business, I think that's when we really do our best work. So I thought that was a very productive day, and I was glad to be able to contribute. You guys are doing great things for your clients, and for me to be able to contribute to that, made me feel good. So thank you.
No, that's good. So Mike, today, what I want to, because again, I took out a lot of valuable info when we met. Couple of thoughts. Think about, today I really want to speak to the entrepreneur who is in the process right now or about to be in the process about franchising their business. Certainly they're going to be relying on their franchise lawyers, franchise development, and many times the insurance requirements sort of become an afterthought in the whole process, right? So I want to give those emerging franchisors insight as to things they should be aware of, actionable tools, and then also for the emerging growing franchisors, right? Everything's going well, they're growing, they have systems in place. As they keep adding on franchisees, what are some protections, policies, procedures that they could put in redundancies to protect them. So I'd love that to be the focus of what we talk about today.
Sure.
Okay. And then, so we spoke briefly. So starting off, Mike, with emerging brands, right? What I see is one of the biggest issues is that as a franchisor, or franchise attorneys, many times people don't even have an insurance plan. And I'm not saying it needs to be complex or detailed, but from a general standpoint, what do emerging brands need to know when they're starting off in terms of insurance and planning ahead?
So you're going to hear me use the word logistical support a lot. I think it's important to look at, designing the insurance program from the franchisor side so that you're helping your franchise unit owners. And when you do that, in turn, you're helping protect the brand. So you're probably going to hear me say a lot today, the words logistical support. You're going to hear me say brand damaging claims, things along those lines. In my view, getting with somebody in the insurance business who understands general insurance as a whole, but also the franchising world, because the operations and the exposures of a franchisor are different than the franchise unit. So if we're talking about helping the franchisor with their coverages, that's a completely different business model than the franchise unit. They're not doing the same things. So working with somebody who understands those differences, one of the reasons why it's important to work with a franchise attorney like yourself versus, a guy who's doing wills and trust work. They don't know the franchise space. If you can, my view on this is helping entrepreneurs protect and grow their business. And the grow the business part is difficult in the insurance industry. But if we can help the franchisor with this support so that their unit owners can enroll and buy their business insurance quickly, their HR, their payroll, all of these things, buying, that helps them get started earlier, and they're going to generate revenue and send that back, to home office, back to the ZOR. Buying an insurance policy is an arduous task. Nobody likes to do it. I don't like to do it. But it's a necessity. And if the franchisor can get that program in place so that it's nice and easy for their unit owners, it's a lot of help. And they need to rely on people, such as me or someone like you to make that introduction, that kind of thing.
So I'm starting a franchise right now. In terms of an actionable tip, right? If you're starting off, if you're in the process of franchising, either myself as a franchise lawyer or the team, the founders, the process would be to get someone who knows the industry, right? And say, hey, look at our insurance requirements. What do you recommend? And what do you recommend that we require our franchisees to have? And it could be as basic.
Well, yeah. So it's a twofold process. The franchisor has its own exposures, and we need to look at those differently than the franchise unit owner. So when we're looking at the coverage for the actual operating entities, that's where the general business knowledge comes in, because those exposures are a little bit different and you need to design a different type of policy. So I would want to sit down, or I would want your ZOR to sit down with somebody and focus on what the exposures of the operating entity, what the business model is, and then start talking about those exposures and the things that you can do for insurance. But there's also other risk management tools out there. Not everything is solved by buying an insurance policy. So there are ways to transfer risk with contracts and just a host of things that I think need to be part of the entire process. It's not just about, buying an insurance policy.
Okay. And so in terms of a game plan, what I found interesting was, well, there were a couple of things, and we'll talk about it, I think in some of the next slides, but one thing when we spoke, which I didn't realize, you had mentioned that, in addition to the logistical support, it's really important to have a relationship with a preferred carrier, right? And that could achieve cost savings and economies of scale. And you also, at that point, you discussed with me, it was interesting. So if you're a franchisor, right, and let's just say you have 40 franchisees, and right now your franchise system operates where, hey, these are our requirements for insurance. Everyone gets their own individual policies. They operate with different carriers or brokers. Now, you explained to me if there is a preferred carrier, and I think you discussed if there was a singular or
common effective date.
Yeah. So explain to me why, if I'm starting out now, why 2 years from now, when I have 40, 50 franchisees, it's better for me to go through one preferred carrier, or I'm a more growing, mature system, why it's better that I start moving franchisees to a preferred carrier?
Well, I think it's really important. And again, I'm speaking from the insurance point of view, and I'm worried about the brand damaging claims that could be suffered by a unit owner that then affect, the ZOR. And right out of the gate, they're susceptible to these kind of things. So in my view, I think it's important from day one to really put something in place. It doesn't always work out with one carrier because there isn't any scale yet. But if you can, I think it's better to start that way. But as you grow, one of the things that the franchisor, I don't think fully appreciates is how much power they actually hold with their vendors and what they can do to leverage that for the benefit of their system and of their unit owners. And one of them happens to be insurance. So I'm kind of showing you a little bit of vulnerability right now by letting people know, you kind of got me by the short hairs, but that can be used to your benefit. And when you get with the right insurance providers, people who are really vested and buy into the system and want to be part of it, I think, everybody's growing in the same direction. The concept behind the common effective date is that you're not quite big enough to have what we call a program where we've got our own, let's say, manuscripted insurance policy or something formalized along those lines. You can get that once there's scale involved. But for that emerging brand in that, under 100 range, from 50 to 100, let's call it, if we get everybody on a common effective date, the insurance company, when I'm negotiating with the insurance company, I can kind of treat that like a quasi program. So it kind of looks and feels like it, but it isn't. And the thing is, I can go to the insurance company and say, look, I've got this particular, system that this entire block of business is renewing on June 1st. What are we doing to help them? How are we mitigating rates? I'm managing all of the loss data, so I know how all of the customers are performing from a claim perspective. I can use that to go to the insurance company and say, we're looking for you to vie for this business. What are you going to do? I have a competitor. One of your competitors would like to work on this one too. They'd like it. So what are you doing to differentiate yourself? How are you bringing value to this particular franchise? So that's kind of the concept with a preferred carrier and a common effective date. Once they get really big, hey, we can create captives. We can get them their, essentially create their own insurance company. But that's a whole other issue.
See, what I found interesting about this is, I think it's a great concept. I definitely think it's under evaluated in the emerging space. So if I'm at 50 franchisees, I have, in working with a particular broker or agent and consolidating my franchisee purchasing power, the concept would be to come to someone like you and say, hey, look, here's my franchisees. Here's what we're doing right now. One, I want you to take a look at our policy coverage and let us know if you make any recommendations. And I appreciate your focus, Mike, on, maybe we need to amplify franchisee insurance when it comes to brand protection, which has a collateral benefit for the franchisor. But two, what I do like is, hey, this concept of a common effective date, and even though these franchisees are all independent, let's act as if they're one entity. And your point being is, well, the system is not big enough yet to create its own organic purchasing power. We could effectively do that by grouping together all the franchisees and be in a better negotiating position.
Exactly. We're mimicking a program. It's conceptual. It creates a lot of work on the back end. So that's why it's important to partner with an insurance company and a broker who can support that. To a bit of a negative to it though is it can frustrate, at least in the first year, where your unit owner may have a 4-month policy versus an annual policy, but with proper communication, it can work out. But having the right broker, my view on this is that when the franchisor is talking to an insurance broker for a preferred relationship, that should be they need to be able to provide coverage, all states, for all of their unit owners, wherever they're growing. In my view, the insurance broker should be part of the team, a valued part of the team, and really looking to help the brand grow. I think there's a differentiator when you're interviewing brokers in that regard. That's the kind of person I think you want to look to.
Yeah, and that gets into, I mean, on our deck, and the advantage of having one broker as part of the team, right? And so there too, I think. So when we spoke, I think a couple of things. If your franchisees are better protected as a franchisor, you have less headaches. The other thing I liked about the team approach in terms of insurance, and thankfully I've been able to rely on you when we're working with our brands and looking to protect them. But what was interesting to me, and I know you recommend this not from a profit standpoint, but when we had sat down, you were a big proponent of including in the FDD and in the franchise agreement a provision that says that if we designate a preferred insurance vendor, you have the option to use them or not. But if you don't use them, then we're going to charge you a fee to review your insurance policy. And the thought being, look, if you use our preferred vendor, someone like yourself, we've worked with that vendor already. They know exactly what the insurance coverage we want. Maybe we have the common effective date, and it's less work, less friction, more protection. And of course, giving them the option of, but if you do it on your own, then we're going to have to rely either internally on our internal team to review the insurance coverage, or someone like yourself. So I thought that was extremely, I think that's an extremely valuable approach for the brands. Again, from the theory that many times brands are neglecting reviewing and ensuring that their franchisees have the right coverage.
And that's arguably one of the biggest exposures that I've seen, is that the coverage requirements that protect the brand and that are in the FDDs are not being adhered to. So I can't tell you how many times, but we're finding that franchisees are out of compliance. And, the ZOR doesn't have the time or the energy. They're in brand growth mode. That's why they rely on vendors. And, when you see these issues, it drives me crazy, because all this work goes into the thought process of what kind of coverage we need, understanding the brand, and then we just let the franchise unit owners kind of run amok, and it's like the inmates running the asylum. We don't know what kind of coverage they have. The back office people in the ZOR's office don't understand insurance. A lot of people in my industry alone don't understand it. So, that was part of something that I thought, and in full disclosure, that wasn't an original idea of mine. But it made a lot of sense to me in kind of processing that through and how I approach it. Again, the franchisor has got so much leverage, and when they partner with the right broker and insurance company, they can get all of this support so that they know their brand is protected. And it doesn't cost anything. That's what we live for. We live to serve. So why have your team, who could be focused on doing other things to grow your brand, why have them doing this monotonous reading, insurance certificates, which don't accomplish anything anyway, where, you can have that done by the broker. Once you've gone through the process of creating that preferred vendor relationship with an insurance carrier, and we've made it easy for the unit owners to onboard and get their coverage, we want to kind of, I don't like the word control. I think that's too of a heavy-handed, but to a certain degree, we want the franchisee to be able to make a decision quickly and onboard, and not go through the arduous process of buying insurance. So when you get all of these things in place, again, the logistical support, once that's all done, and there's a process, I think is very beneficial to the unit owner. In the end, I know that they're protected. Because I've actually vetted it, I've read the policies, I know they're in compliance, and I can report back to the ZOR and let them know everything is good.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that there was a 100-unit system, hasn't spoken to their insurance rep for over 2 years, and I think that the real value here in what you're saying, and I've seen it firsthand, is, and you keep mentioning this value proposition, but is the fact that as a franchisor, I'm sort of wasting my leverage and I'm not creating those economies of scale by partnering up with one broker, one agent, who then is going to have every incentive at no extra cost for me to not only negotiate the best rates, work toward a common effective date, but also be my go-to resource for doing my annual insurance audit. Hey, is everything in order and where it should be? Yeah.
You use the word annual insurance audit. I mean, that's a perfect example. For me, once I get these things kind of going, I'm not involved in the day-to-day, client called, how much do they owe? We've got supports teams, and again, partnering with the right insurance company that can provide that support as well. So that you're right, it's now a much higher level relationship with the ZOR, and we can focus just on risk management and growing their brand. It takes the right person, to do that.
Yeah, it's again, I just think it's interesting because this has been so overlooked and it's such a value. And again, no one likes looking at insurance provisions in the FDD. I think no one does. No, I mean, I don't even know if people like talking to insurance brokers and people, right? So
take that back.
Yeah. Except you. But so Mike, and again, I'm looking at the slide, so I have, I'm jumping ahead a little, but not from a technical, so what are the types of policies or protections that you think people are overlooking and they should pay more attention to in their franchise disclosure document, in their franchise system?
The word is, I mentioned it earlier and it's there in bold, things that are going to damage the brand. The traditional, the world has evolved when it comes to exposures and things that can cause claims. So, we're talking about cyber issues and private data. We're talking about employment-related issues, abuse and molestation, wrongful termination, things like that. I'll give you an example. When someone slips and falls in a quick service food, breaks an ankle or something like that. I mean, it's awful. Nobody likes to see a claim happen, but it's going to settle pretty quickly. It's not going to draw a lot of attention, anything along those lines. Conversely, if word gets out that the general manager in a quick service food is having inappropriate relationships with several of the young staff members, now all of a sudden, if that hits the news trucks start showing up and people are on social media, typing with their elbows on their keyboards about what a horrible company you are for allowing this to happen. That damages your brand. Nobody cares about the person who broke their ankle. There's no publicity to it. So those are the things that, I like to at least engage a discussion in with the franchisor. We're going to be doing the general liability coverage and the workers' comp and all of those things anyways, just because those exposures have always existed. But there are things that are out there that you need to have a conversation. Our job, in my view, is to educate. I need to educate the franchisor, talk to them about these things, and then together, put something on paper that makes sense to be passed along. So I think, in reading the FDD, those are some of the things that I like to see when they're in there, because I know that at least there's been a conversation.
Now, Mike, just briefly, not to get into but cyber claims, does that provide protections in terms of point of sale systems, customer data?
Yeah, not only customer data, and we think about cyber. It's a really good question, Charles. We think about cyber and we think about computers and we think about media, and what we're really talking about is data. I like to tell this great story. I'm going to condense it, but in the movie Wall Street, when Charlie Sheen buys the cleaning company, and the next scene is he's in the guy's office with a pen light looking at carbon paper. In today's world, that's a cyber claim because it's data. So we're not only talking about customer data, we're also talking about employee data. So that's where, the cyber issues come from, and the claims come from two ends. One is the damage to your own systems, so your computers and getting the bug, having to get a computer guy to come in and find out where the bug was, where's the intrusion, how many records have been damaged, and fixing the infrastructure part, but also the third party. The particularly damaging thing about cyber claims is they're generally not one-offs. So before I describe the one person who falls and breaks an ankle, when you're talking about cyber claims, you could be talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of clients or customers, or depending on the size of employees, data who's now been breached. So instead of dealing with one claimant, you're dealing with an angry horde, bearing pitchforks and torches. It almost looks like a class action suit. So they're just incredibly damaging.
Yeah, that I didn't even know it existed until we spoke recently. So
yeah.
And, and again, this gets to, we talked about coverage and things like that. It was definitely helpful. And again, for the franchisors out there, to have someone like yourself read the FDD, just because a lawyer puts it together, sometimes the FDDs are overly technical with the coverage, I found, at least, or sometimes they don't adequately describe what needs to be covered. One interesting thing was, naturally, we had a conversation. We actually had included in our franchise agreement, in our definition of gross sales and what creates a royalty, but also the fact that any income from business interruption insurance counts toward gross sales and is a function of it's subject to royalty payments. And I think you brought up a good point, which was in the coverage provisions to ensure that the business interruption insurance covered royalties and
right,
100%.
So the royalties, we want to make sure that business, while it's in what we refer to in the business as a state of restoration, that those ongoing payments are being made. So depending upon what the royalty scale is and how that's structured, we want to make sure that that's there.
Yeah, and I it's way too technical, but I saw the benefits firsthand of having you read through these requirements and working with our clients. So that was really helpful. And then now, in terms of franchisors introducing an insurance product or getting franchisees on board, what's your recommendations in terms of at least the dialogue or the value that a franchisor should be articulating to franchisees in having a unified insurance program?
It's always, this is probably one of the most challenging things I deal with emerging brands, because we're walking that tightrope between making sure the brand is protected and protecting the unit owner's cash flow, especially in the early stages, and not bombarding them with just loads and loads of insurance premiums. So it's a challenge, but it's one that in my view is a painful one to go through, but I think it's important for the franchisor to start out from the beginning with a sound risk management program to at least touch on some of the exposures. So maybe we don't need millions and millions of dollars in cyber, but maybe 300, 400. I'd rather have a little bit of a lot of different protections than a whole lot of one protection and not any of others. But it's important also, I think, for the franchisor to kind of have a gentle controlling hand when it comes to working with their franchise unit owners and guiding them through this process and letting them know, hey, we've made this decision for you. That's part of the advantage of being in a franchise system. You don't have to think about this. The logistical support, it's already been done. We've got a preferred vendor. We spend a lot of time doing this. They know what they're doing. They know our systems. I've heard this word a lot in the franchise space. They get us. So I think in doing that and then relying on the broker to perform. And that's one of the advantages, jumping back a little bit to the earlier thing we talked about with the common effective date. Look, I work for, when I view this, I work for the ZOR. The unit owner is my client, I get that. But the ZOR has so much power and so much control, and I respect that. If we get to that stage where we've got a common effective date, they can effectively fire me and take that entire block of business and go to another insurance company and another broker. So, we're constantly seeking to perform and improve that performance and represent the brand. I think when the processes are in place, it's not an issue, but it can be a challenge. It can be a challenge. One of the other things that we want to make sure of, and I think it's important from the educational and training point of view, is to look beyond just the purchase of insurance and see what kind of other support the insurance company and the broker are providing. Are we getting information out, topical and pertinent information about their particular business space that's going to help them in their business? So it's it's a combination of those things.
Mike, again, back to basics, which is if we could work with one broker, common effective date, and also having that broker on board. Again, the franchisors have this sort of cost-effective, I won't say free, but it's free resource in terms of, hey, could you take a look at my operations manual on insurance, my FDD, recommend a program for our franchisees, help us communicate it to the franchisees, and then help us achieve some cost savings, whether it's now or plan it out for a couple of years from now with a common effective date. So I think those are really important.
The key thing right there is that the difference. We use the word preferred vendor relationship, and going back to the reviewal process. The ZOR, I don't think, is doing a favor to their unit owners or to their system when they just give a list of 3 or 4 different brokers. Everybody's got a brother-in-law who works for an insurance company or a neighbor or something like that. But if they don't know the system, if they don't know how to read the insurance requirements, and if they're not invested in making sure that the franchisor, in addition to the unit owner, is protected, all they're doing now is just selling an insurance policy, and that's the end of it. There's no focus towards that that growth and scale.
No, I agree. I think as a franchisor, 2 things I would love. One, telling my franchisees they're getting better rates because they're part of our system. And 2, around December of every year, shooting you an email and saying, hey, Mike, or whoever I'm working with, please take a look and just confirm to me all our franchisees are up to standards, right?
Yep.
Those are very powerful, cost-effective things.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's really powerful. And then in terms of trends, and to me, the biggest item I want to talk about, which we'll get to in the next slide or so, is liability insurance for franchisors. But in terms of trends, I think you've brought up cyber insurance, employment practices, which I think those are big. Any other key items that at least should be on the radar for a franchisor?
Well, again, we look at this not only from just buying or selling an insurance policy, because there's so many other things that are involved. One of the things, and it's on the slide there, the Amazon effect. Businesses are changing, and getting with your professionals, your team, and I like to consider to be considered to be part of it when we're talking about the group of professionals, the lawyer, the accountant, the insurance broker, and looking, how do we have to evolve? Do we have a plan? What's our 1-year plan? What's our 3-year plan? What's our 10-year plan? And getting those people involved in it, I think, just creates for a stronger system. So it's not always about the purchase of an insurance product. There are other risk management tools that go into it. I know you love the 606. The things that I see franchisors getting sued for, and we're going to talk about it in a second. But the managing their cash and managing their balance sheet, I think it's more and more important today than before in really managing the business from a strong, sound financial standpoint. When we talk about the business, I'm talking about the ZOR entity. Because as 606 kind of evolves and we see what further guidance we get going forward. I'm not an accountant, so this isn't accounting advice, but I think that's something to kind of pay attention to. and it's definitely worth, you know, a very specific conversation. I think when you're talking to your accountant, you want to allocate, you know, a few minutes just on that particular topic.
So, and just for everyone who's on, you're referring to accounting standards in terms of balance sheets and capitalization, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So again, I think you're thinking even further ahead, but Mike's referring to new accounting standards and regulations that are requiring franchisors to defer recognition of franchise fees as an initial asset and actually creating more liabilities. And your point is that could impact cash flow. And I think that's definitely smart.
Yeah, their ability to manage their debt, you know, things like that.
So what I want to do, Mike, because so for me, this is the biggest issue, which is for the franchisors. I'm a startup franchisor. I'm an emerging franchisor. I've done a great job, and I have a franchisee that doesn't succeed. They hire a plaintiff's lawyer who's looking for a contingency fee, who is now going to tell a story that I somehow did something wrong. It's not to say franchisors don't make mistakes. They do, and they do. But in the franchise world, one of the most devastating things that I've ever seen for an emerging franchise brand is to get sued, right? Because a couple of things happen. One, the lawsuit itself creates a disclosable event for the FDD. Two, it distracts a management team. Three, it costs money. So now you're hiring lawyers. And the impact is profound that I've seen. And I'm proud to say, I mean, the brands we've worked with, consulted with, these are founders that when they are sued, they're shocked because they do the right thing. They're trying, but you are dealing with the public. You are dealing with franchisees. It's bound to happen where you get the wrong franchisee, or worse, I hate to say it, there's lawyers out there that really are just going to try to develop a case against a franchisor for the pure point of making money because they think the franchisor is an easy target, which gets to the next thing, which I'm a big fan of, but you know, I definitely, so my understanding is there's liability insurance for franchisors who get sued by franchisees, whether it's an FDD disclosure issue or a breach of a franchise agreement. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's a professional liability policy. The franchisors are doing. It's an interesting model, and this is where, you know, working with somebody who understands franchising, the franchisor is touching on so many different professional aspects in business. You know, reviewing FDDs and managing the FDD, legal work, getting involved in leases, legal work, getting involved in territory selections, real estate. I mean, the list goes on and on. Advertising, all of these different things. So there are professional liability policies out there that kind of encompass all of that. All of those exposures, all of those operations. So whereas an example, you know, you're a lawyer, you've got a lawyer's legal policy, it's covering you for the legal services you're providing. But if you were to do accounting advice or insurance advice, you'd have no coverage. The franchisor professional policies kind of touch on all of these things that they're doing because it's such an interesting service that they're providing as a franchisor to the unit owners. You touched on something about the lawyers, and I can tell you from first world experience, real world experience. I'm not going to mention names, but there's one out there that I know of who has created a cottage industry of just getting with franchisees, getting them riled up, and getting them to file lawsuits or arbitration claims. And all it takes is just one unit owner who may be disgruntled, and all of a sudden, you know, now they're all talking to each other, and you're right, it's devastating. The lawsuits, the allegations in the lawsuits can be groundless, and still you've got to defend yourself, and that's the whole thing. Is what do you do? Where do you go? How do you get defense? So it's incredibly devastating for all of the reasons that you mentioned.
Well, Mike, and then for franchisors listening to this, right? So the things you worry about is that, like your points are right on point, right? So if you get sued by a franchisee, say you have an active plaintiff's lawyer who brings a baseless claim. I mean, I've legitimately been consulted by franchisors, and I look at the claims and I'm like, I can't even imagine how this would be a claim, right? But they bring these suits on the theory that if they could sustain an initial motion to dismiss, they now have the franchisor involved in the suit. They also, depending on the state, certain states have franchise relationship laws or franchise agreements where if whoever wins on a claim, the other side has to pay their attorney fees. And so sometimes they may sue for these very big claims, but if they win on a little claim, they could potentially trigger a state statutory violation or a claim that they're entitled to fees. And it is devastating. So, I mean, so basically for me, like a malpractice policy, you're saying as a franchisor, I could go out there, I could purchase a liability policy for these types of lawsuits and claims. Is that what they need?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a pretty robust market for it. There are a bunch of carriers. Like any insurance policy, they're all different. Some are better than others, but there's a very robust market for these type of coverages, and it's a very valid exposure for not only emerging brands but even larger ones. But the emerging brands especially, even one allegation at the developing stages can just stop the entire system right out of the gate because they don't have the money to defend themselves. These lawsuits, you know what it costs to defend a lawsuit.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what also too is what you'll experience in these suits. First, I've seen the coverage kick in and perform where they're covering these franchisors. So that's good. The other thing too is as a franchisor and a founder, a lot of these plaintiffs' lawyers will try to add the individual founders as individual plaintiffs in the suit.
Yep. Yeah.
Not just the franchise company. And it'll be done under a theory of different franchise laws. And they're doing it to serve as a threat for the founders and try to provoke a settlement. So I think that type of coverage is really important. So Mike, if I'm recapping, right, because my thought process is whether I'm a startup or emerging, or certainly I'm under 100 units, I certainly want to bring on a professional insurance person to be part of my team. That person's really not going to be costing me money, is actually going to be making things more effective. I should be focused on a common effective date because at a certain point I could pool my leverage with my franchisees. I should certainly be considering policies that involve cyber insurance, cyber risk, labor relation type claims, and naturally liability. And then also, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is if I'm consolidating this purchasing power, I now can go to my broker and I could have him or her check on my compliance on an annual basis, as opposed to just leaving that as a task that may not be getting completed.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit I think on all of the key points, and really each one of them just brings so much benefit to the franchisor. I think this has been a very productive conversation from that point of view, because quite honestly, I don't think franchisors have considered it. Insurance, is kind of a last and an afterthought. It's something that, we have to get because, and I get that, but I think if done properly, it can be used, for the franchisors, obviously protection, but for their benefit and for the benefit of the unit owners.
Well, and again, if anyone has a question, they could, in the group chat, feel free to throw it out there. We actually, one question, someone who actually emailed me today was able to attend, but I did send him the slides. And one question he had and had asked me to bring up was, in terms of the professional liability policies, what's the pricing range that you see or a franchisor should expect? So let's assume I'm just starting off and it's my first year offering franchises, and let's assume I'm at 50 units. what are the factors that get evaluated for underwriting and determining the premiums on those?
Well, they're going to look at your FDD. Some of these policies are, they provide coverage on a contractually driven basis. So basically the services that you're agreeing to provide in the FDD are the services that they're covering, subject to certain exclusions. Whatever you hear is exclusions. From a pricing standpoint, I've seen them quoted as low as $5,000 for a very young system. Once you start getting up into the 50 unit-ish range, we're under 20, 15, and then if you throw in the directors and officers coverage, which is the private management liability portion, you could be, right around that $20,000 number for a 50 unit system generating, a couple $1 million in revenue. So they're not really that expensive.
Yeah, it's interesting though on the even on the lower end for the startup, $5,000 for the first couple of years, each year, it could actually have a significant cost savings. It depends on, I would say is this. I think in many ways, I don't know enough about this market. A couple of things I do feel. One, I think I could be a 50 unit brand that's a restaurant concept with a $500,000 startup expense versus a 50 unit mobile service-based business. And I view those risk levels as very different, right? One group of franchisees have spent $500,000 plus to start up. The other ones have spent $80,000 to start up. So there's less of an incentive for risk. I think also the interesting thing, if I'm a startup franchisor, knowing what I know and what you've just said, if in my first year, I see sales scaling up pretty quickly, which means as far as you're concerned as an insurance company, I don't have sales on the radar. I buy policy in year one, start scaling up sales, selling a lot. I think at least in year 1 and 2, I'm getting a bargain if I do it the right way. And because I'm scaling quicker than the policy realizes.
Oh, you're definitely outpacing. There's no doubt. Yeah.
So I definitely, so for me, especially where I think clients are going to scale quickly, they're industry veterans, or they have, they're in a hot segment. I love these policies out of the gate, or at least, at the end of the first year, I love them.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's really affordable. It's great protection. And there are other services that come with them as well. The insurance companies that generally will provide some risk management, consulting services, so there's a lot that comes with it beyond just the purchase of an insurance policy. I think there's a lot of value there, quite honestly.
No, it's great. And I've seen it and I appreciate it. Mike, I super appreciate this. I mean, it's a topic I never love talking about, but it's so important for our brands. So I know there's other topics we're going to be talking about in the future, but I really appreciate it. And anyone's listening, just feel free to reach out to our team. We can connect you with Mike. Anyone would like us to send a PDF or this deck and these slides, we're glad to mail it to you or send it by email. I know Mike personally, and for so many of our brands and many people that Mike doesn't even do work with, he's taken the time to really help them get their insurance strategy right. So I really appreciate that, Mike. And Mike, I appreciate the time today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I love doing this kind of stuff. Anything I can ever do to help, that's my, I'm in the customer service business. So I enjoy it. I find it rewarding and challenging, and it's all good stuff. And I really appreciate the opportunity, Charles. I've enjoyed the conversation.
By the way, if anyone's in Red Bank, New Jersey, every Friday we have our Bourbon Friday at the office. Mike is one of the veteran members, so if you ever come out, it's open invitation at our offices, and you'll get to meet Mike. But Mike, thanks again. I promise
we won't talk about insurance.
No insurance. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks, Charles. Have a good day, everybody.